Alrighty, we are back with Bible 101, the foundations of Bible study, and we are talking about authors and audiences. Different authors in the New Testament, especially, are writing to or for different audiences, and we have to acknowledge this first of all and accept it. This is particularly true again in the New Testament. Yeshua tells us who his audience and his disciples' audience is, who they were intending their message for. It says right here in Matthew 10, these 12 disciples Jesus sent forth and commanded them, saying, Go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as ye go, preach, saying, The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely you have received, freely give. And so Yeshua right here is telling us who his audience and the audience of his disciples are. That was then and now. And so he clearly tells us who his audience is. I've come to learn that many people believe that Paul was a disciple of Yeshua. He was not a disciple. He was not one of the 12 disciples. He was not a disciple of Christ, did not follow Christ around. He was not an apprentice of Christ, none of these things. Okay, so we need to know that so that we can understand when we're looking at audiences and authors, we have to first know who the 12 disciples are. And Paul was not one of the 12 disciples. You can find a list of the 12 disciples in Matthew 10, 2 through 4. And also in other places where certain disciples were replaced and things that is all spelled out very specifically in the New Testament. Paul was not one. All right. So go ahead and verify that as soon as you have a chance. For now, I'm going to move forward and say that Paul also tells us who his audience is. As a matter of fact, he addresses the particular audience in each of his letters. So first, let's look at where Paul tells us who his audience is. Romans 11:13, he says, For I speak to you Gentiles, in as much as I am the apostle of the Gentiles. I magnify my office. So he's saying, I am an apostle to the Gentiles. I am not a disciple of Christ. I am not a disciple in the sense of the 12 disciples, which were sent specifically to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I am a disciple or an apostle sent to teach the Gentiles, right? He says it right here. Now, also, if you look at the beginning of any of his letters, or most of his letters at least, you will see that he addresses he usually addressed his audience in the beginning of his letters. All right. This one right here is not specific, but let's see. FIL. Most of his other letters are very specific. All right. So in this letter, the Philippians, Colossians, Galatians, and all these different letters, they are written to those people. They are addressed to the Philippians, Colossians, Galatians. These are all Gentiles. These are all Gentile churches, communities, nations, whatever, congregations, whatever we want to call them. And so that he literally addresses the people that he is speaking to. If you want to really get down to it, he's talking to these certain churches about certain issues that are going on within that particular church. Now, his writings are useful to the Gentiles and even to us at times, because even though he's speaking to a particular church, telling them you do this, do that, or don't do this, or don't do that, stay strong, whatever, it is an inspiration to the reader of those messages who might be going through or experiencing the same thing, who is on that particular journey. And so it's useful. God has purpose in everything that he does and in all of his word. However, um, sometimes we have the tendency to read a message that is not intended for us and to try take it on and accept it and receive it and live it, and it's not intended for us. It's intended for someone else. And so I say that to say this: Paul was to be the apostle. He was ordained, chosen by God to be the apostle to the Gentiles, not to Israel. On the other hand, the 12 disciples were chosen to teach the children of Israel specifically. And so these are the ones that we need to be paying very close attention to. It doesn't mean that we can't read Paul's writings or any other writings, because we never want to turn away knowledge. For example, I believe at least that in the New Testament, Paul gives the absolute best explanation of the nature or position of Yisrael. And at the time he was giving it, he was talking to the Gentiles. And it's in Romans 11, starting at verse 17. And it says, and if, oh no, wait, I think it starts before this. Oh yeah, it starts way before this. All right, so he says, for I speak to you Gentiles, and as much as I am the apostle to the Gentiles. Oh, this is long. I thought it started further down. All right, but we are going to go ahead and read it. Okay. So let's just start from the beginning. I say then, hath God cast away his people? God forbid, for I also am an Israelite, and the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God hath not cast away his people, which he foreknew. What ye not what the scriptures say of Elias, how he maketh intercession to God against Israel, saying, Lord, they have killed thy prophets, and dig down thine altars, and I am left alone, and they seek my life. But what saith the answer of God to him? I hath reserved to myself 7,000 men, who have not bowed the knee to the image of Baal. Even so, then at this present time also there is a remnant according to the election of grace. And if by grace, then it is no more of works, otherwise grace is no more grace. But if it be of works, then it is no more grace, otherwise work is no more work. What then Yisrael hath not obtained that which he seeketh for? But the election hath obtained it, and the rest were blinded. All right. And so Paul is saying that the elect have obtained what they seek, but the rest were blinded. Okay. And then he goes on to say, and he's talking to the Gentiles about Israel. Remember, he's answering the question, has God cast away his people? Okay, and he answers the question quite bluntly here. He says, God forbid, right? No, God did not cast away his people. But then he goes to explain in depth what's going on or what's happening with God's people. And so he says that Israel has not obtained what they seek for because only the election obtained it and the rest were blinded. According to as it is written, God hath given them the spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear unto this day. And David saith, let their table be made a snare and a trap and a stumbling block and a recompense unto them, that their eyes be darkened and that they might not see and bow down their back always. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid. But rather, through their fall, salvation is come unto the Gentiles, for to provoke them to jealousy. So Paul says, God has not made Israel blind so that they would fall, but he made them blind so that salvation would be available to the Gentiles. And Israel would look at the Gentiles and say, oh no, that's my God. I want my God. I want to serve my God. And in jealousy. And then in 12, he says, now if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? And so Paul is saying, think about it. If when they fall, the world becomes rich, and if when they diminish, when they are killed, when they are made small or less, then the Gentiles become rich, how much more is their own fullness? And so Paul is demonstrating that when bad things happen to Israel, he's saying even when bad things happen to Israel, good things, it makes good things happen in the rest of the world. And so he's saying, if the bad things that happen to them could make the rest of the world good, well then how good or how much or how full do you think this person is? And so I guess an example of this is, if I'm this is a bad example, but it's all I got. If I'm a gambler and I'm gambling, and when I lose $5, the rest of the table wins $100. Well, then how much power do I have? If my losing can be a blessing to someone else, then how great am I? And that's what Paul is trying to convey. If my losing is a blessing to the Gentiles, is a blessing to the world, then how great is my blessing and how great am I? What is going to happen? And you'll see this in the next few verses. What is going to happen when I am blessed? Even greater things. And that's what he's trying to express. He says, for I speak unto the Gentiles, and as much as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office. 14, if by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, and might save some of them. And so he's saying, if I can, I'm going to do whatever. Paul is saying himself. He says, I, Paul, will do whatever I have to do in order to make them wake up. And this is what I have been sent to do. I've been sent to you, and I'm doing it because I want my people to come to their fullness. And in 15, he says, for if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from dead? And so again, he's making this point that if when they are cast away, it allows the whole world to have reconciliation. Imagine what is going to happen when God receives them back. He says, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. The dead will become alive, right? So this is powerful. And so at 16, for if the first fruits be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou, being a wild olive tree, wert grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. Boast not against the branches, but if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root bears thee. Okay? And so what Paul is saying here is, you are a wild olive tree. He's telling the Gentiles. He's saying, Gentile, you are a wild olive tree. And they are the original tree. They are the first fruit. They are the holy thing, the holy one. And if God is going to allow some of their branches to break off so that your wild branches could be grafted in, then why would you boast? And he says, he warns them not to boast against the branches. And he goes on to say, thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off, then I might be grafted in, that I might be grafted in. Well, because of unbelief they were broken off, and thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Behold therefore the goodness and severity of God on them which fell, severity, but toward thee goodness, if thou continue in his goodness, otherwise thou also shalt be cut off. And they also, if they abide not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. And so Paul is sending the message to the Gentiles. They are the original tree. If God allowed them to be cut off so that you can be grafted in, how much quicker will he cut you off and graft them back in, right? And so this is the message that Paul is giving. And he goes on to say, I'm looking for it. It goes on to say in 26, and so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. Okay? And so he gives us a very in-depth, a very deep look at God's plan for Israel, like no other book in the New Testament, in my opinion, has ever given. And you should really study this story, and it should give you a lot of insight regarding the condition of Israel. And so I say all that to say this. We can't turn away knowledge. We can't simply say that we don't want to read this or don't want to read that. But we have to understand who the audience was. For example, here in Romans 11, it is clearly stated that Paul's audience is the Gentiles. However, this information that he is telling the Gentiles is useful to Israel to know what their condition is, why they are the way they are, and that they will be redeemed, and why they will be redeemed. So it gives you a very deep understanding of our condition, and so it's very useful. Imagine if every time you told one person to do something, everyone in the room would get up and run and do the same thing that you told that one person to do. That would be complete chaos. And we don't serve a God of such chaos. Rather, he chose a people and he teaches his people to do what they have been created to do, while teaching at the same time Gentiles how to recognize and receive his gift, which is his people, the light of the world. And so just keep that in mind as you continue in your studies. Be blessed.